Good morning. It's April 17th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with Seoul and Washington joint air exercises kicking off today. South Korea and the United States are staging large-scale regular joint air drills in the South Korean city of Gwangju. The 12 days of training will involve over 100 warplanes and aircraft, with around 1,400 personnel mobilized. Korea-Japan security policy consultation will take place here in Seoul today for the first time in 5 years. The director-level talks are a follow-up measure from the Jong-un Kishida summit last month. A Sweet 16 birthday party turned into a disaster in Alabama over the weekend, with a shooting that left 4 people dead and dozens injured. Our top story this morning, as tensions remain high here on the Korean Peninsula, Seoul and Washington allies are heading into their largest joint air drills. The South Korean Air Force from Monday is holding large-scale joint drills with the U.S. military at Gwangju Air Base. The exercises, codenamed Korea Flying Training, will run until next Friday, featuring about 110 aircraft in total. That includes about 60 fighter jets, such as the F-35A, F-15K, and KF-16, as well as tanker planes from South Korea. The U.S. is contributing approximately 40 aircraft, including the F-35B and F-A-18. This exercise is a continuation with the new name of the annual Max Thunder air drills that started in 2009. There will also be 1,400 soldiers deployed. South Korea and Japan will hold director-level talks on diplomacy and security in Seoul on Monday for the first time in 5 years, as a follow-up measure to the Jong-un Kishida summit last month. The 12th Korea-Japan security policy consultation will be held at the Foreign Ministry in Jongno-gu in central Seoul, with 2 officials from each side. Monday's meeting comes as leaders of South Korea and Japan agreed to bolster diplomacy and defense amid intensifying threats from North Korea. During today's talks, the 2 sides are expected to discuss cooperation in related fields, while also coming up with countermeasures against North Korean provocations. Over in Japan, the G7 ministers meeting in Sapporo ended with a statement that failed to welcome Tokyo's plan to release contaminated Fukushima water. Our Choi Soo-hyung tells us more.
The G7 meeting of climate, energy and environment ministers from 7 major countries was held in Sapporo City, Japan over the weekend and ended with the adoption of a joint statement. The statement welcomed the scientific dismantling of the Fukushima nuclear power plant, which is being conducted in cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and recognized Japan's transparent efforts. Regarding the discharge of contaminated water from Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea, the statement also expressed support for the safety verification of the IAEA. However, according to Japan's Asahi Shimbun, the phrase welcomed the release of contaminated water that the Japanese government wanted was not included in the statement. This is due to opposition from Germany's environment minister. The South Korean government reconfirmed its position on the contaminated water in response to the G7 meeting statement. It stated that the process should be scientifically and objectively safe and comply with international standards, and that all aspects of the disposal, including information sharing, should be conducted transparently. Japan plans to release contaminated water from Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea by this summer. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
A North Korean patrol ship crossed over the de facto border in waters west of the Korean Peninsula on Saturday. The South Korean Navy fired warning shots. The North Korean ship appeared to be pursuing Chinese fishing boats in the area. Our defense correspondent Kim Hyun-sung reports.
A ship from the South Korean Navy fired near a dozen warning shots after a North Korean patrol boat crossed over the de facto border in the waters west of the peninsula on Saturday morning. The ship from the north crossed over the maritime border, dubbed the Northern Limit Line, or NLL, and sailed for almost 2 kilometers into the South's waters. The ship stayed south of the line for about 10 minutes before retreating. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said Sunday that they're not sure as to why, but they see it as unlikely to be an intentional provocation from the north. The ship could have been chasing down some Chinese fishing boats, they said, judging by how it was tailing some Chinese ships as it zigzagged through the sea. The South Korean Navy fired warning shots only when the North Korean ship remained unresponsive to multiple communication attempts. The military also said that the South Korean ship crashed into a Chinese boat during the incident, causing several injuries. 3 South Korean sailors are currently in hospital, with one getting treated for what's reported to be a collarbone injury. The JCS said there was poor visibility at the time, with sailors only being able to see about 90 meters ahead. The day of this latest event also happens to be the birthday of the regime's late founder Kim Il-sung, and it's North Korea's biggest national holiday. The North had also crossed the Northern Limit Line 6 months ago. However, that crossing was seen as clearly intentional. It also came closer to the brink of a heated clash, with warning shots fired from both the North and the South. Some experts worry that North Korea is going to use this latest incident as pretext to once again bring up their discontent over the NLL, which they have never recognized as a fair border. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
We're into the second week of getting no response on hotlines connected to North Korea. On top of the silence, leader Kim Jong-un appears to have skipped a visit to the commemorative mausoleum, the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, to mark his late grandfather's birthday. For more on this, let's turn to Professor Brian Myers from Thomson University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Good morning. First off, like I said, Kim Jong-un doesn't appear to have visited the mausoleum built to commemorate Kim Il-sung on his late grandfather's birthday over the weekend. Professor, why is that?
Well, he didn't visit the mausoleum 3 years ago either, and it's the 111th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's death, I believe. So it's not a particularly round number. It's not a particularly important anniversary. The outside world, I think, tends to look at any change in North Korea's routine as a sign of instability or maybe the leader's poor health. But my impression from reading North Korean speeches over the past few years is that Kim Il-sung's importance to the political culture as a whole has been receding. And I see that as a reflection of a certain confidence on the part of his grandson. His regime has been performing very well by its own military first standards, if not by our standards of economic growth, let alone human rights. So Kim Jong-un may well feel that he doesn't need to rely on his grandfather's myth to quite the extent that he used to. And finally, this is the age of drones and drone attacks, so it makes good security sense for Kim Jong-un, just as it does for America's adversaries in the Middle East and everywhere else, not to be completely predictable about his whereabouts on any given day.
I see. Also, we cannot now talk about the missile launch that took place last week. What's behind North Korea's decision to resume missile activities on top of cutting the inter-Korean hotlines? Is there a particular reason?
Well, I think the main motivation for this latest missile launch was a technological one. Namely, the North wanted to test launch a solid fuel ICBM after years of testing short-range ballistic missiles. Each step in the North's nuclear program naturally leads to the next step up. And that technological progress follows its own timetable. And I think just as much attention is given to things like weather conditions as to dates in the calendar. At the same time, of course, every successful test sends propaganda messages in different directions. For the North Korean people themselves, it's another demonstration of the great success of the military first policy. For the South Koreans, and this, I think, is also where cutting the hotlines comes in, it's intended to show that North Korean provocations will always increase when a conservative government is in power here. And finally, perhaps most importantly, it's meant to show the Americans once again that they cannot hope to slow down the North's nuclear progress through sanctions.
Right. Now that you've just mentioned the North's latest ICBM dubbed the Hwasong 18. Let's talk about the latest ICBM. What do we know about this ICBM and what makes it more advanced from previous ones?
Well, its predecessor was the liquid-fueled Hwasong 17. The regime last tested that in March. It's supposed to have an operational range of about 15,000 kilometers, which is far enough to reach the United States. Now, we're not all that sure about the range of this Hwasong 18 yet. But the most important difference is that it's solid-fueled, which means that instead of having to be fueled in plain sight very slowly before a launch, which would give the Americans a kind of advance notice, the Hwasong 18 can be more or less suddenly wheeled out of nowhere with a full tank, as it were, and then fired so quickly that the enemy doesn't have enough time to respond or to launch a preemptive strike. So this kind of missile poses a much greater threat to the United States than the conventional liquid-fueled type of ICBM like the Hwasong 17. Now, the South Koreans have been trying to downplay this latest news, saying it was just a mid-range test, we don't know how far it can go. And we know from those leaked American documents that have been in the news for the past few days that the White House believes Pyongyang is, quote unquote, overselling its nuclear capability. But I think most Western nuclear experts agree that it would be very foolhardy of the United States not to proceed from the assumption that the North now has a solid-fueled ICBM capability.
I see. Before we let you go, Professor Myers, let's go back to the now cut off inter-Korea hotlines. Some experts say the lines will not be restored anytime soon. Are you on the same page? I mean, when do you think the lines will be back up and running again?
Yeah, I think the hotlines are unlikely to be restored during President Yoon's term because the North wants the South Korean electorate to believe that inter-Korean relations are always going to get worse when the conservatives are in power here. I think if South Korea were to cancel military exercises or make some other concession, the North might restore the hotlines for a while. But I think too much fuss is made about these hotlines. The truth of the matter is that inter-Korean communication has never depended on these hotlines. The two states have historically conducted most of their communication through other more discreet channels. And we also need to understand that even when the hotlines are allegedly operational, the North routinely refuses to accept calls from South Korea. That happened during the Moon administration as well. So I think the main function of these hotlines is as a low-risk way for Pyongyang to signal its satisfaction or dissatisfaction with whatever is going on down here. And I expect the two states will continue communicating under the water, as Koreans say, or behind the scenes if they have something important to discuss. But these symbolic hotlines will probably not be reconnected until the South makes some sort of concession to the North.
I see. They are pretty symbolic and they haven't done any harm yet so far, so let's keep a close eye on it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Professor Myers. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Sure thing.
Four people were killed and over a dozen others injured during a deadly shooting at a birthday party in Alabama on Saturday. Among the dead is the brother of the girl celebrating her sweet 16. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
What was supposed to be a joyous Sweet 16 birthday party in Alabama on Saturday turned into a deadly event with 4 people shot dead and over 24 others injured.
This incident occurred at approximately 10:34 p.m. near the 200 block on Broad Neck Street here in Dadeville in Tallapoosa County. All right. There were 4 lives, not fatalities, lives. There were 4 lives tragically lost in this incident, and there's been a multitude of injuries. As they said, this is going to be a long, complicated process.
The Alabama Law Enforcement Agency said that due to the seriousness of the incident, the FBI, the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the 5th Circuit District Attorney's Office were all present at the crime scene and are currently assisting with the investigation into the shooting. Among those killed is the brother of the girl celebrating her 16th birthday. Many of those wounded are also teenagers, including several who are currently in critical condition. Authorities did not provide any information on a potential suspect or any possible motive for the shooting. The latest deadly shooting in the U.S. comes just weeks after two high-profile shootings that occurred in the nearby states of Tennessee and Kentucky. There have been at least 146 mass shootings in the U.S. so far in 2023. The rise in the number of mass shootings in the country has prompted more leaders to call for tougher gun control laws. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, South Korea saw a record number of working senior citizens last year amid a rapidly aging society. According to government data Monday, the number of employed people in their 60s and above reached 5.6 million in 2022. Now, this marks the first time that the age group added more than 400,000 workers in a year since 1963. The number of self-employed among this age has also jumped by a staggering 70% over the course of 6 years. With this, the age group for the first time accounted for 20% of all employed people. The latest data shows that the trend continues into this year and is largely due to those in their 60s and older, now taking up a quarter of the country's entire population. South Korea's mission to be carbon neutral by 2050 continues and in fact is more active than ever. One ongoing project is renovating old buildings to make them more eco-friendly. Our Shin Ha-young has this report.
In order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, South Korea must reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, which accounted for 1/4 of the country's total emissions, by 32.8% compared to 2018 figures by 2030. But this is not an easy task, as many older buildings weren't built to current standards that take emissions into account. With these older buildings in mind, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport launched a project to support those who plan to participate in green remodeling, which aims to improve the environment indoors while reducing greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. This was a police station for 40 years, and after undergoing green remodeling, it's now an energy-efficient office building with its energy cost 65% lower compared to before. Installing solar panels helped transform this office into a more eco-friendly place. In particular, the building integrated photovoltaic or BIPV system on the exterior walls not only saves energy, but also enhances the appearance of the structure. It also has a building energy management system to monitor and control the building's energy needs. This daycare center is a much cozier place for children during the winter since going green. An energy-efficient thermal pane window using low emissivity glass allows sunlight in during winter and keeps heat inside. In summer, the windows block out heat while still letting in natural light.
We used to consume around 14,000 kilowatt-hour of electricity per month, but after going green, it went down by 2,000. This place was freezing during the winter, but now it's so cozy and warm that even the kids can run around barefoot.
This eco-friendly university library improved its energy efficiency by 50% compared to before. It uses a heat recovery ventilator to improve indoor air quality by replacing stale indoor air with fresh air from outside. Starting this year, the green remodeling project for public buildings has expanded to senior centers and public libraries. As for the private sector, the government decided to provide more financial aid to participants.
About 12,000 private buildings undergo green remodeling annually. But last year, due to the rate hikes, there were fewer participants. So this year, the government is focusing more on private buildings.
He added that green remodeling has become more attractive these days as energy bills rise. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Japan, where a suspect has been charged for throwing a smoke bomb at Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The suspect, a 24-year-old man from Kawanishi City, was charged on Sunday, local time, and this with forcible obstruction of business, a sentence that carries a jail term of up to 3 years and a fine equivalent to $3,700. Now, he was arrested after reportedly throwing a homemade smoke bomb at the PM during a campaign event on Saturday at a fishing port in western Japan. Kishida was removed from the scene unharmed before the device went off. Authorities are determining whether the device was meant to be lethal. The incident drew immediate comparisons to the assassination of former PM Shinzo Abe last year. He was killed by a gunman using a homemade firearm. Now, Germany has shut down its last 3 remaining nuclear power plants. Power stations Isar 2, Emsland and Neckar-Westheim 2 had their plugs pulled on Saturday at midnight. The move is in response to years of anti-nuclear protests prompted by nuclear-related disasters, such as those in Fukushima and Chernobyl. It's also in line with Germany's ambitions to generate all of its electricity using renewable methods by 2035. But some are skeptical of the move, claiming it will have negative economic impacts. Germany's neighbors, meanwhile, have moved in the opposite direction, with Finland opening Europe's most powerful nuclear reactor on Sunday. It comes amid energy supply concerns due to Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, fighting has been halted in Sudan after rival military factions agreed to a temporary ceasefire to allow people wounded in 2 days of heavy clashes to be evacuated. It comes after a weekend of violence between rival troops from the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The clashes broke out on Saturday local time across multiple locations. Troops fought for control of Sudan's presidential palace, its state TV and army headquarters. At least 56 people were killed, including 3 workers from the World Food Programme. The violence comes on the back of a proposal that would transition the country's military government to civilian rule and would see the RSF integrate with the Sudanese army. The country has been run by a council of generals since a coup in October 2021. And finally, an extreme athlete has emerged from a cave outside Spain's southern city of Granada after spending 500 days there in isolation. Spanish mountaineer Beatriz Flamini saw sunlight for the first time on Friday since entering the underground cave on November 20th in 2021. The goal was to break the world record for the longest time spent in a cave in a project called Time Cave. The record is still being confirmed. The challenge was monitored by scientists looking into the effect this would have on the mind, as well as human circadian rhythms. She was supported by a team that dropped off food and supplies at an exchange point within the cave. During her time in isolation, she missed major world events, including the outbreak of the war in Ukraine and the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
Good morning. The up and down temperature trend continues, which is common this time of year. And after a chilly start this morning, a warm afternoon will take shape across Korea. Yellow dust engulfed most of Korea yesterday, and there's still some lingering dust in the capital area in Chungcheongdo provinces, but expect to have bad air quality during the first half of the day. And those of you in the south already have improved air quality under plenty of sunshine, while the central regions will see sunshine replaced by clouds as the day goes on today. A pleasant afternoon is in store with breathable air and nicely warmed up temperatures. Then rain clouds will form tonight. Rain that's starting from northern parts of the country will gradually spread nationwide overnight, and Chungcheong, Namdo, and Jeollabuk-do provinces could see up to 50 millimeters of rainfall. Seoul and the rest of the inland areas will see 5 to 30 millimeters. Rain continues into Wednesday in southern provinces, while the capital will see highs soaring to 27 degrees Celsius on the same day. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all we have for today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.